Hi everyone, and welcome to our video on Learning Objective 1-4. In this video, we are going to discuss something called the impact cycle. So impact is an acronym that we use to summarize the accounting analytics process. And what those letters stand for are: 1, I is identify the questions, M is master the data, P is perform the test plan, A is address and refine results, C is to communicate insights, and T is to track outcomes. So IMPACT, impact cycle. And this is the process, or this is the methodology that we use to organize our thoughts around data analytics. So any good data analytics process always starts with a question, and then we end by sharing our results and tracking outcomes, and then we start the process all over again. So this is a cycle. This is not a process that you complete once and then you are done, because our analyses will start with a question, and the results of our analyses likely will lead to a new question that we had not considered before we started performing the analyses. All right, so this is a cyclical process. And let's talk about each of these areas in a little bit more detail here. Let's start with identifying the questions. When we ask questions for data analysis, it's best to have a concrete, specific question that can be addressed with data analysis. Now, if we enter data analysis with a question that is vague and not specific, when we gather the data to perform the analyses, it's likely that we'll go off on all sorts of tangents, because we're not focused. We're not focused enough on what we're trying to answer and what the outcome that we're trying to achieve is. We have not clearly defined the outcome. So I'll repeat that. So data analysis starts with asking the questions, and those questions are best formulated when they are concrete and when they are very specific. And concrete, specific questions are what allow us to use data analysis to get the results that we want. So what types of things should be considered when formulating a question? Well, we have to consider the audience. Who's the audience that's going to be using the results of our analyses? Is it going to be the auditor? Is it our CFO, our Chief Financial Officer? Is it a financial analyst? Or is it a tax professional? When we formulate our question, we have to consider the audience. We also have to consider the scope. So we talked about concrete, specific questions. Well, this relates to the idea of scope. Is the question that we have too narrow, or is it too broad? We have to think about this. And we also have to consider its use. How are the results going to be used? Is it to identify risks? Is it to make data-driven business decisions? What are we trying to accomplish here? All of these are important in formulating a good question. The next step in the impact process is mastering the data. So in this part of the impact cycle, we're going to search out a set of data that could potentially answer the question we formulated in step 1. So we want to identify data. We have to obtain the data, and then oftentimes we'll have to take the data that we obtain and format it and correct and clean the data so that it's usable, so that we can analyze it without any issues. And when I say clean the data, oftentimes, and you'll see this when you work through the data assignments in this course, oftentimes data is messy. For instance, there are fields missing. If we're talking about employee data, oftentimes the employee data set will have employees that have missing addresses in the data. Some employees will have addresses listed, some will not. What do you do in those situations if you're trying to analyze some location type of variable? Where do our employees come from? If you're trying to analyze that, Well, if not all of your employees have address data, you can't really analyze that question. So we have to master the data. We have to know what the data can be used for and what it cannot be used for, and whether or not there's errors in the data. All right? So step 2 here is master the data. Step 3 in the impact cycle is to perform the test plan. So after we've asked the question, we've gotten the appropriate data, we've got the data cleaned up, and we're ready to analyze it, now it's time to take it out for a spin. Let's analyze this data, see if we can answer our questions. So we're going to perform our analyses. We'll do things like perform regression analyses. We'll do things like perform descriptive analytics. We'll look at means and medians and modes and standard deviations. We'll perform predictive analytics, where we're trying to predict what is going to happen going forward. So here we'll use forecasts and sensitivity analyses. So we can do all sorts of analyses, and I'm going to teach you these analyses as we go through this course. But step 3 is the heart of data analytics. This is where we're spending most of our time. All right, and hopefully, before we get to this point where we're actually doing the analyses, we've formulated a good question. I cannot stress this enough. It is vitally important to make sure that you have a good question up front, because that question is going to drive all of what you do in data analysis. Next, step 4 in this impact process is to address and refine results. All right, so we're going to take the analyses that we performed in step 3, and we're going to ask ourselves, is it possible to look at this in a different way? Are there some analyses that we could perform to complement what our main analyses have already done? Can we slice the data or dice the data or manipulate the data in some other way that will add a little bit more information to our overall analysis? And then we'll conclude here with steps 5 and 6. So steps 5 and 6 are communicate the insights of your analyses and to track outcomes. C and T in the impact cycle. Communicate insights, track outcomes. So communicating insights involves taking your analyses and the results that you got from your analyses and the conclusions that you reach from your analyses and putting them into a report, and putting them in a report in such a way that somebody that has no familiarity at all with data analysis can understand what conclusion you reached and how you reached that conclusion. Right, so not only are we going to write reports, but we're also going to present our information. So we're going to stand in front of people and we're going to present in a meaningful way, in a way that's very understandable, what we did, why we did it, and what our conclusions are. And then, likely, we're going to have some recommendations. We reached this conclusion, therefore we recommend this. Okay? So then we're going to want to track outcomes. We recommend that we do X, and let's make sure X actually works. Okay? And we're going to track that going forward. And then at the very end of the day, you think you're done, right? You've been through step 5 and 6 of the impact process. Well, you're not done. Because oftentimes, like I said earlier in this video, our analyses will lead to new questions. And so the impact cycle is a cycle. We go back to step 1 after we complete one iteration of this process. All right? Okay, in this video, we talked about the impact cycle. The impact cycle is very useful for organizing your thoughts around accounting analytics. All right, so we're going to, if you understand this at a conceptual level, everything that we're going to do in this course, we're going to attach information to each of those pieces. We'll start by going through asking good questions, that I part of the impact cycle, and then we'll move into mastering the data. And so I think this impact cycle is a useful way for organizing your own thoughts about data analysis. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care.